after the election, and there may be new faces here. So thank you all for your support during the time that I've been chair. And it's back over to Mike now to introduce the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of our usual procedure, just so I can ensure that members can clearly see and hear us, I've confirmed your participation already. So next, Councillor Concepcion, please. Can you see and hear us okay?
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please. Good morning. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle, welcome. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson, can you hear us okay?
Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Kennedy? Just unmute your microphone, Malcolm.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat?
Oh, good. Thank you, Michael.
Brilliant. Councillor Makinson, can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. I don't believe Councillor Dunn or Councillor Radford are here, therefore their apologies will therefore need to be noted on this occasion. That concludes our checks in terms of the member who will have voting entitlement. We also welcome Councillor William Jorsall, who's a speaker on one of the applications later on at today's meeting. We have apologies, as I've indicated, from Councillors Dave Cummings and Steve Radford. We'll therefore move on to declarations of interest. Do members have any to declare, please? If so, could you please state those clearly now for the benefit of the record?
Yeah, I have an interest in item 10, 64 Allerton Road, in that I've already objected to it, so I won't be voting on it. Am I able to speak on that as a ward councillor or not?
That's at the discretion of the chair. If
Okay,
I may.
thank you, Chair.
Yes, I will allow that, Councillor Makinson.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make a note of Liz speaking on that particular application. Are there any further declarations from members? No? Thank you. We now turn to the minutes of our last meeting as held on the 6th of April, pages 4 to 11 of your agenda pack. Any concerns or comments from members after content? No? Are you happy to agree? If you just indicate visually on screen if you can, please, for the benefit of the record. Thank you. That's perfect. Finally, procedurally, we have urgent items of business. I'm pleased to advise there are no urgent issues to report today. So we'll therefore move straight on to our formal published agenda items. First item is number 4, and that relates to railway land adjacent to a number of sites, specifically Rosewarne Close in Liverpool 17, Lynmouth Road, Liverpool 17 again, Cornfields Close, Liverpool 19, and land adjacent to Jericho Lane, Playing Fields, Liverpool 17. Whilst the application does reference Mossley Hill Ward, it is noted that there's more than one ward included within the list of sites concerned. So, Chair, if I can revert to you at this stage, thank you.
I'm just wondering why it is that Councillor Makinson has got a hand raised. Councillor Makinson,
Sorry.
was that left over? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Thank
apologies, Chair.
I lost track a bit there, Mike. So are we ready for item 4?
We are indeed, Trish. We have the agent present, and I can display a
So I'd like
presentation
to
if you're happy.
invite Sean Gaffey, who I know is present, to introduce this item, please.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Sean. You
morning.
carry on now.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Sean Gaffey, here again from RJP, representing the applicant AD Comms. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak again this morning. Appreciate you've seen these applications before, but thought a brief presentation would be useful. So to recap, this is our 14th application to Liverpool City Council. The previous 13 applications have all been approved, 7 here at committee, including at the last one on the 6th of April, and 6 have been approved under delegated authority. After today's application, there is 1 Liverpool application left to be determined. So this application again relates to 4 sites. The proposed works are for the erection of 4 8.9 metre columns mounted at regular intervals between St Michael's and Liverpool South Parkway stations. All columns will be installed trackside on Network Rail land on sites selected for ease of access and minimal disturbance to public amenity. Line-side power cabinets will house the electrical componentry for each of the 4 columns, powered using existing trackside sources. Could we have next slide, please, Michael? Cheers. So this one is Rosewarne Close. It's TBS 091. This column will be located in a cutting that's heavily screened by trees on both sides It's on the southwestern side of the tracks and approximately 26 metres from the nearest dwelling on Rosewarne Close itself. Residential properties are located on both sides of the cutting. Next slide, please. This is TBS 092. It's land adjacent to Jericho Lane playing fields. This column is proposed within a railway cutting again, with playing fields on either side. There's a single residential property at an oblique angle to the proposed column location, approximately 20 metres away. Next slide, please. This is TBS 023. This is Lynmouth Road. This column is to be located again within a cutting. It's heavily screened by trees to both sides. To the southwest is open land with a small number of residential dwellings that are side on to the railway. To the northeast is located a vacant former community building and residential dwellings which back onto the railway. Next slide, please. This is TBS 128. It's railway land adjacent to Cornfields Close. This column is to be located within the railway boundary and benefits from screening on both sides. There are residential properties in Cornfields Close to the southwest, with a playground / open land to the northeastern side of the tracks. The column will be located on a part of the railway between two dwellings, so as not to be in direct line of sight from habitable rooms, and would be viewed at oblique angles from the main habitable windows. So, as alluded to above, this application forms part of a wider scheme for the rollout of Wi-Fi equipment that will improve the Merseyrail passenger experience, as well as railway safety by enabling CCTV footage to be viewed directly from the Merseyrail control centre. It will also provide passengers with high-quality wireless internet connectivity. It's an improvement to a key local sustainable transport mode that is supported by both local and national planning policy. As you'll have seen in the supporting documents for the application, the entirety of the scheme is set within operational railway land and is modest in scale. And finally, and as set out in the Case Officers Committee report, any visual or residential impacts caused by the equipment would be minimal, and given the support provided in both national and local planning policy for the expansion of electronic communications networks and upgrades to the efficiency of the railway network, such impacts are considered acceptable. That ends my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
And before I invite any questions, I'd like to say, Sean, we very much welcome the fact that you seem to be only the third appearance from any sort of telecommunications applicants. We did originally at the very, very start, when we granted one, get somebody from one of the major companies, but we're always happy to invite people to speak, because our planning committee often have questions that get resolved as a result of having somebody on behalf of the applicant to come. So I'd like to invite any questions now from the committee members. Sean, there don't seem to be any questions this time. So I'm going to pass over now to Alan Walker, who wishes to speak to us, I think, on behalf of the Lynmouth Road application. He can tell us himself. So, Alan?
Yes, thanks very much.
I can hear you.
Can you see me?
I can see you as well.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to go ahead, you have up to 3 minutes.
How many?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, I'll be quick. I think for me, it's not the actual mast that I'm objecting to. If you look, I don't know if we can get the map back up of Lynmouth Road again, but you can actually clearly see the access road runs directly through my land. Now, we have had masts on the land for the last sort of 7 years, really. We had 2 previous masts owned by Telefonica. And in all honesty, during that time, we had considerable issues with regards to criminality. And what I mean by that is that while the work was taking place, I don't know if the committee members can actually see the little road coming from Mersey Road. While the work was taking place and when further maintenance or visits to the site, what was happening is that the land, the gates and the access was opened up basically to the public. Now, over the years, we have had, as I say, issues regarding criminality. We have had thefts of machinery and tools from the site, and in all honesty, it was all surrounding maintenance to this to the mast. We haven't had any issues with regards to Network Rail or the work being undertaken on the railway. It just seems to be the visits that we have. Just in the give you an example as well. Just in the last month, the gates have been left open on 3 occasions. Now it is quite a private site, and that's why my family bought it. And we have had occasions where people have walked onto the site and previously actually threatened my father, who has now sadly passed away. But it came to the point where, you know, he was that fearful that he approached the previous. Hello, sorry. And we did have to employ security. So that's a question for me to ask Sean, really. Would he be prepared that while this work was taking place and any further site visits, that I can employ security, really, just to protect my property? You know, I've got no objections against the mass taking place. It's just the security of my home and my land, and that's really what where my objection comes from.
Thank you for that, Sean. Now, I will give, Alan, I will give Sean an opportunity to speak, but I do think I need to add that this wouldn't be normally an issue for planning. It would be more of a police and security matter, of course. But Sean was very helpful last time about an objection we had from a resident of my ward, and you did say, Sean, that you would ensure that access was taken from the right side of the tracks in that. So I don't know if there's anything you can say to address the issue.
Firstly, Alan, thank you for your comments. This is obviously the first I've heard of this issue, so thank you for shining a light on it. In terms of security, are you proposing that you're going to hire security staff? Is that what you're saying, or?
In all honesty, it was previously agreed that, as I say, the previous Telefonica, because of the ongoing issues we had when people were visiting the site, in the end, they agreed to pay for security whilst they were attending, whilst the workmen were on site, and I actually employed them. Just on the days that they were there to ensure that nobody accessed the land other than the workmen, really. And it's all closed up afterwards.
The only thing I will say is that this scheme obviously is on operational railway land, so the teams that go out there to construct these columns, they have to sort of agree in advance with Network Rail when they can get access, and they have to go on and adhere to all Network Rail health and safety rules and regulations and things like that, and they have to be as quick as they possibly can. So I can't speak to the Telefonica site or their procedures, but all I can try and do really is give you a bit of comfort that we intend to be in and out of site as quickly as possible, and whilst the site will be sort of need regular maintenance, I'm not sure how often we'll need access to the site. It won't be that much, really. So I'm hoping that it sort of sounds a little bit different to the issue that you had with Telefonica, without me obviously seeing that site.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Alan and Sean, I would suggest that we invite some questions now from councillors and then pass on to our case officer who may have a comment about this. So first of all, are there any questions for Alan or Sean before I pass on to the case officer? All right, can I invite our case officer to comment now, please, and summarise the issues?
Thank you, Chair. Stuart Clark, team leader of the South team. As you've had a detailed presentation from the applicant as to the rationale for the proposal, as you've heard, the proposal's for virtually 8.9 metre high masts, which will be part of the network rollout of 4G technology across the entire Merseyrail network. And as you've heard, a number of previous similar consents have been granted, including a very similar one to this one at the last committee. The proposed masts will all be wholly within the railway lands and sites so as to minimise any impacts on the amenity of nearby residents. At 8.9 metres in height, the masts are very similar in scale to streetlights and are screened by a mix of vegetation and by being located in cuttings. As such, the siting and design of such masts are considered to be acceptable and fully in compliance with local and national planning policy. In terms of the concerns raised by Mr Walker, these are very much matters outside of the planning process. They're matters between two private individuals or companies, and it seems to be it's about security and access to the railway. Sean will correct me if I'm wrong, but that's primarily Network Rail's responsibility. But that's very much something that if there's any agreements about security, it's not something that the local planning authority can become involved in, and it's not something that we should control. So there's not much we can assist in that process, Chair. But in terms of the actual application that you're being asked to consider, we're happy that it's fully compliant with local and national policy, and that any adverse impacts would be offset by the wider social benefits that the technology will bring both to the operator and to passengers of the network. So we're happy to recommend approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Tricia, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Are there any questions for our planning officer? I will come on to you, Sean. You've got your hand up, but I must prioritise the members of the committee. There don't seem to be. So, Sean, did you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that in planning terms, a crime impact assessment was submitted as part of the application as well, which supports the scheme, if anybody wants to read that.
Thank you for informing us about that, Sean. So do we have any other points before I move on? No. So I'd like to agree that the recommendation be accepted.
Tricia, can I say I won't be voting because I didn't hear the whole debate. I've plugged in.
Okay, Steve. Yes, I know your voice, Steve. I know your voice, Steve. So, yeah, that's fair enough. Okay. So we'll move on to the vote now, please, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. We have a clear resolution moved by the Chair in terms of proposal to approve the application. Are there any further comments from members of the committee? No. In which case, I will take the vote formally. So firstly, Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion. Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agree.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Makinson.
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this particular application, and of those members present and eligible to vote, the voting is unanimous in favour, and the application in relation to the 4 sites is therefore approved. Before we move on to our next item of business, Councillor Radford, in terms of the virtual meetings procedures, Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020 and the associated regulations which govern virtual meetings require that for you to participate, you need to also be seen as well as heard for purposes of voting and taking part. I'm not sure if you're able to join on your laptop as well or have a webcam available to you.
I'll try on the webcam, but my audio doesn't work there ever since you muted me. Something else to get put back on. So I'll do that now, Mike. Thanks for your guidance. I'll do that right now.
Thank you, Councillor Arthur. That's much appreciated. We'll move on to our next item in the meantime, which for members' benefit is item number 5 on the published agenda, and which relates to Kingsway House on Hatton Garden, Liverpool 3 in Central Ward. Chair, if I can revert to you, please.
Can I invite David Morse to guide us through this application, please? The slides should be coming up, David, if you'd like to speak. Yes, they're there now.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, and you have up to 5 minutes because you're a presenter.
Thank you, Chair. So my name's Dave Morse, and I'd like to just provide some brief commentary on Signatures Living's proposals for the change of use of the ground floor of Kingsway House on Hatton Garden. I'll just run through a small number of slides to provide an overview of the site location and proposal, the existing building and its relevant planning history, details of the proposed development and its design, and run through relevant planning considerations to conclude. Right, the site is a 60s former office building on Hatton Garden, which falls in the main office area as defined in both the extant UDP and the emerging Liverpool local plan. The site is also within the Castle Street Conservation Area and World Heritage Site, and in proximity to a number of listed buildings. The property itself is not listed and has been subject to a change in use and extensions and alterations achieved via a combination of permitted development and full planning permissions, the details of which are set out in your report pack. The upper floors are currently being converted to residential accommodation with the rooftop extensions at an advanced stage. Planning permissions are therefore established the principle, and the implementation of those permissions has secured that residential use on the site. Officers are now comfortable that the change of use of the ground floor is also acceptable in principle. Next slide, please, Mike. The application site comprises the Undercroft area of the existing building, which had previously served as a mix of covered car park and internal office space. The extant permission already allows for the enclosure of that Undercroft space, but its use as flexible commercial space. Following the grant of that permission, though, Signature Living have actually taken the decision to change the use to residential accommodation rather than the permitted commercial floor space. Next slide, please. As you'll see, and apologies if these aren't overly clear, the application seeks permission for the change of use of the ground floor to create 16 units, ranging from studios up to 3 beds across single and double storey spaces. The development will include a small integral office space for use by residents for home working, so you can see in the middle of the building there. The issue is that the site is very deceptive insofar as there is a number of substantial level changes across it. It presented a significant challenge for the architects to ensure that the space was used effectively whilst achieving necessary space and accessibility standards. To assist with meeting the standard, an entrance to the northwest has been incorporated into the scheme, which provides level access from the street to the adaptable and wheelchair compliant units. Through detailed discussions with officers and some amendments to the internal layouts, the scheme is now considered acceptable by your officers on amenity and accessibility grounds. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the extant full permission already included for the enclosure of the application site. As part of this application, however, revised designs for the enclosure have been prepared to reflect the domestic nature of the use. The commercial enclosure utilised a series of large curtain wall sections. This has now been amended to introduce a series of brick piers, and that provides some rhythm to these elevations and gives a more coherent appearance with the facade design on the upper floors. During the life of the application, we did work closely with officers to ensure that the proposed facade design is appropriate in respect to the host building, to ensure the character and appearance of the conservation area is maintained and the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site is preserved. Additionally, it was important to ensure that a balance was struck with respect to the fenestration to allow sufficient natural light into the building while ensuring that privacy for future residents is achievable. The resulting elevations are now considered acceptable by our officers on design and heritage grounds. Next slide, please. Then just applying the sort of relevant planning considerations and sort of draw things to a conclusion. The site is within the Castle Street Conservation Area, World Heritage Site and main office area. Officers consider that the proposed development will not undermine the objectives of these designations, and it meets the relevant legal and policy tests. The upper floors of the building are already in residential use via a number of previous applications. There are no objections from statutory consultees nor neighbour objections. The site is sustainably located, close to a wide range of services, public transport, and therefore there's no over-reliance on the private vehicles. And the proposed development would continue to represent the effective reuse of a vacant building. In light of the above, the application is wholly compliant with the relevant parts of the development plan. We trust that you agree with your officers that the application should be approved. And I thank you very much for your time.
So are there any questions for Dave? Councillor Makinson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, in principle, I think the idea of moving from office space to residential is a good one in the light of pandemic and changed working patterns. However, there are a couple of issues which do concern me with this. Firstly, the issue of parking. So there's no parking provided for 16 flats, and if I've read it correctly, no possibility of parking permits for those flats. That will necessarily lead to some congestion. You know, there may be some people who choose not to drive, but for the whole of the flats, it seems unlikely. And also, 3 of the 1-bed units do not comply to national described space standards. And I'm just wondering if you can shed some light on why that would be the case. So it should be 50 square metres, but they do go down to 46.1 square metres. So I'm just interested in why they couldn't be made according to the national standard.
Thank you, Councillor Makinson. I'd like to make clear, I'm not sure whether you said 16 or 60. There is parking for the originally consented apartments. It's the remaining 16.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, you did say 16. Okay. And I can invite you back in if you would wish to comment, Dave, but also the case officer might pick up on this.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up those comments.
Okay, go on then.
Sorry?
Yes, carry on then.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're talking about a city centre location here, and we are dealing with the reuse of an existing building, where there's been no opportunity for additional parking, and with public transport, with the accessibility of the site, proximity to all services and everything else, your highways colleagues were content that this could be a car-free development, and of course we have included for cycle parking as well, just to sort of assist with that side of things. And then in terms of the space standards, obviously we are in excess of the SPG 7 as it relates to sort of space standards, and we fall just short on the nationally described space standards. However, what we've had to take into account is this building was extremely, believe it or not, this ground floor was extremely difficult to work with. It was an undercroft car park essentially, so there was no level floor to begin with, so the architects had to sort of balance the floor areas against an effective use of the site. And as you'll see from the officers' report, they are happy that balance has been struck.
Might have been possible to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and keep the
Councillor Makinson, I'm sorry, but I didn't invite you to speak again, and you didn't raise your hand. We're now going to be handing over to the case officer, who might also be able to address it. You'll get another opportunity to question him, if that's okay.
Thank you,
I don't see any of the other members indicating question the agent for the development. So I will hand over to our case officer now.
Chair, thank you very much. Fergal McAvoy, City Centre Team Leader for Development Management purposes. Chair, I'll just touch on the 2 issues that Councillor Makinson has just raised. In terms of nationally described space standards, 3 of the 1-bed units, now nationally described space standards are far in excess of local standards. For one bedroom apartment, the nationally described space standards is 50 square meters. The 3 apartments that fall below are between 46 square meters and 49.5 square meters. So they're marginally below the threshold. All the other 1-bed units are in excess of this. In relation to one of the 2 bedroom apartments does fall below the nationally described standards. However, this is 66.5 square meters in terms of floor area when the prescribed standard should be 70 square meters. It's a development like this, it's not a new build where you've effectively got a clean slate. You're working within the parameters of the existing building. And I think the report acknowledges the fact that developers have worked quite hard to kind of meet these enhanced standards. In terms of the car parking requirements, yes, there's an existing basement car park which accommodates 50 vehicles and 28 Sheffield cycle stand spaces. There are no additional provision for the additional 16 apartments proposed, but equally so, consent has previously been granted for office accommodation on that in this space, which could have well attracted more demand for the car parking than is currently proposed. There's a number of paying display car parks in very close proximity to the application site. Colleagues in highways are supportive of the proposal, and the fact this is an apartment block within the city centre with 50 car parking spaces proposed, which is far in excess of what you would normally get of a scale development of this scale. Chair, you've got a detailed report in front of you, and you've listened to a kind of very informative presentation by Mr. Morse. There was only one issue raised from an outside party in relation to this application. That was the adjoining Richmond Hotel, who raised some concerns in terms of noise and disturbance from ongoing building work. And there is a requirement for a new construction management plan to be agreed with officers in conjunction with highways and environmental health to ensure that local environmental standards are adhered to. Chair, this scheme is supported by your officers subject to the stated conditions and the signing of a legal agreement. Thank you.
Are there any questions for our case officer? I just wanted to make one comment, and that was that having to go round this site to sort out my laptop computer, I actually did think to myself at the time, it would look much better in field, that ground floor. They were doing the building work to the rest of the building, but that actually popped into my mind, without even knowing that this was coming before the planning committee. I didn't like the fact there was a big undercroft there. I think it will look better. That's my personal observation. So I don't see anybody else indicating, so I think we can move to the vote. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
yes,
Chair.
Mike.
Are there any further comments from members, please, before I take the formal vote? No? In which case, Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Excuse me. Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle?
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Makinson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Radford, have you been able to activate your webcam at this stage?
Yes, I can see all you guys, so I'm on throughout. Yes, agreed.
Okay, Councillor Radford, I note that you are now recorded as fully present, so we will accept your vote for this occasion. Thank you for the patience with the technology. Much appreciated.
Makes a nice change.
So that concludes the voting on the item of business. For those members present and eligible to vote, voting is unanimous and the application is therefore approved on that basis. And we will therefore move on to our next item of business. For the benefit of members and the public observing today's proceedings, item number 6 and 7 both relate to the same location, namely number 7 Croxteth Road, Liverpool 8 in Princess Park Ward. Therefore, both applications will be considered and voted on together at the same point in time. With that in mind, Chair, if I can revert to you, please. Thank you.
Yes. So we take these ones where there's a listed building consent involved, usually with the actual application. And we've had a rather late application to speak from Hilary Rowlands, which I have accepted because I like to get as much democratic inclusion in our meetings as possible. So, Hilary, I think you want to comment on the application before we pass over to our case officer. I don't know if the plans are going to be presented at the same time. I don't know what you want. So, Hilary, would you like to comment?
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm muted.
All right. Okay.
I'm not very good at this. If I could just put the application in context. This application is on behalf of Liverpool Bridge Club. It's a club of about 150 members and we've been in existence over 100 years. It is a social club for mainly older people who play cards. We reside in the big building on that site, which you can see on the map, which does need a huge amount of investment. We're not for-profit organisation and our members come from across Liverpool. So we wanted to use an asset we had to invest in the main building, which is listed also. And that's the purpose of the application. I have to say that because we're a lot of older people, we wanted to improve our access issues, both in access to the building and in how people use the building. So that's the background to it. And the application was made when I was chair. I'm no longer chair, but that puts the context to the application. I think the papers from the case officer speak for themselves.
Thank you, Hilary. Are there any questions for Hilary before I pass over to our case officer who will take us through the plans? I don't see anybody indicating. So thanks for informing us of where you stand on this, Hilary. I'm going to ask our case officer to comment and we might need the plans to be shown again. So is it over to Stuart or is it John?
It's me, Chair, Stuart.
Right, okay, Stuart, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As you see from the papers, the proposal is to use the detached coach house as a 5-bed house and municipal occupation with some minor extensions. The scheme has been amended since its submission to reduce its scale from 8 to 5 bedrooms and the removal of the extensions following heritage concerns. The coach house was last used as a plumber's store and therefore is not an existing family dwelling. In terms of the principle of the use, the proposal complies with internal space standards and there's ample room within the site to provide for waste and cycle storage. The site is located in a residential area and is separated from other residential properties by boundary walls. As such, any activity associated with the use is considered to be acceptable and will not be detrimental to the amenity of any nearby occupiers. The revised scheme now only incorporates a small first floor extension, which has been considered by the heritage specialist as being acceptable and proportionate so as not to affect the setting of the listed building or the character of the conservation area. In terms of impact on the amenity of nearby occupiers, the proposed extension is of a size and scale that will not have any unacceptable impacts on the amenity of nearby occupiers, and there will be no direct overlooking of nearby properties as a result of any fenestration or roof lights introduced. The Head of Highways and Transportation has considered the proposal and considers that the scheme will have no detrimental impact on the local network, and there will be 3 off-street parking spaces provided, as well as cycle spaces, which is significantly more than you're normally considering parking provision for housing and multiple occupation elsewhere in the city. Furthermore, the application sites in a sustainable location for local goods and services and public transport. Therefore, considered the proposal is small scale, acceptable in the residential location, and will secure the future of a Kirtledge listed building moving forwards. We're therefore happy to recommend that consent be granted, but I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair.
And we do have a question from Councillor Thompson. So carry on, Helen.
Thank you. I noticed that one of the objectors in the second round of consultations refers to it as a residential institution. So I'd just like to check, is this going to be an ordinary HMO or is it going to be some sort of supported living setup?
They've applied for housing multiple occupation. So if they wanted to use it for anything other than that, it would need a separate consent.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's for a 5-bed HMO.
Right. And Councillor Makinson?
Thank you, Chair. It's just regarding the measures to safeguard the historical interest and character, things like ensuring that the pipework is cast iron, that the brick matching is done, etc. It's just a question really about how that's kind of monitored, or is that checked on at the end of the project that everything has been done according to the listed building or curtilage listing?
Yeah, as you'll see from your papers, there's a number of conditions that are attached to both consents, should members be minded to approve, that require the submission of all these details to us. Once they get submitted, they will be considered by the conservation team, and subject to them agreeing them, the applicant then has an obligation to implement those things. We do like to try and monitor things as best we can. That's subject to resources, and we do tend to rely on local residents flagging things up if they consider things aren't being built in accordance with any planning permission. But we do our best to try and monitor all applications and consents wherever possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Kennedy, your hand did go up for a bit there. Have you got a question?
It was just probably it's been answered. It was just a simple question. Are the planning officers happy that all of the conservation and heritage issues have been dealt with, and have your approval?
Yes, Councillor. The scheme was significantly amended to remove extensions, which resulted in the loss of 3 additional bedrooms. So the extension and the works that you saw on the plans before have been agreed with the conservation specialist.
So I think I'm going to move on now because there don't seem to be any other questions. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Noting your recommendation that you move approval. Don't appear to be any further comments. Therefore, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed, thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat. Could you repeat your vote, please, Billy?
Agreed. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Makinson.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Radford.
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this application. The application vote is unanimous of those members present and eligible to vote. The application is therefore approved on that basis, and that applies to both applications, the application for planning permission and the associated listed building consent application, both being dealt with under the same vote. We will therefore move on to item number 8 on today's agenda, which relates to numbers 552 to 556 Prescot Road, Liverpool 13, which is located within Old Swan Ward. Chair.
Shortall, which seems to speak on this. So I don't seem to have anybody registered for the applicant, Mike. So I'll invite Councillor Shortall in, unless you are going to correct me and say there's been a last minute
That's correct, Chair. There's no speakers registered present on behalf of the applicants or agents. What I will suggest is when we have the case officer address and sum up following Councillor Shortall's objections, there are a number of plans which may assist members in place the application in context. So those will be displayed for the case officer to talk to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, Councillor Shortall, would you like to come in now, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my ward colleagues and residents of Old Swan. There is currently sufficient issues at Batterley and Booth Street of dumping rubbish at the entry and outside the alley gates. And experience at other locations tells us that dump bin bags and overflowing bins create vermin and public health issues, and these actually become quite serious in that particular area. Well, we welcome the condition of household waste being kept within the yard premises of the development, but we need to be reassured that there is sufficient purple and blue bins, because this was previously office space which is being redeveloped into residential homes. Given that there could be potentially 14 tenants, really need to make sure that there's sufficient purple and blue bins available, and possibly a management plan for the residents who are going to be living there, so they understand that they should be, one, keeping their bins inside the yard and using them, and only bringing them out at the time and presenting them for when the refuse is being collected, because, as I've stressed, it's a real big issue, and there is possibly another development like this, office conversions into retail homes, again further on in the next couple of months, and in the same area. So I really want to stress, can we have some reassurances on a potential bin management plan for the residents, so they know, or potential residents, that they know what their obligations are, and that we have sufficient purple and blue bins made available that are kept within the yard, and they don't dump their bin bags, which is what some of them unfortunately do, outside the alley gates with other residents' bins. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Shortall, and I'm going to pass over to the case officer now, so he'll be able to comment on that. And I do know from our agenda notes that Councillor Miller also had concerns about such issues. So I think I hand over to you now, John.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the public. My name is John Hayes. I am the team leader for development management in the north of the city. Chair, this is an application for the conversion and alteration of a number of properties on Prescot Road for their use as an 8-bedroomed house in multiple occupation. The works are facilitated by the installation of a number of windows to the rear and some alteration to the ground floor in order to allow access to the upper floors. You'll see, Chair, from the background in the report that there has been a previous application in relation to this site, which was refused planning permission back in 2019. The reason for that refusal was around the amenity of the proposed HMO, and in particular the windows that were proposed at that time would have directly faced the gables of a number of properties, therefore reducing the possible outlook for a number of those bedrooms. And it's on that basis that the application before you has been submitted and amended accordingly. So the scheme has now been submitted that tries to resolve those issues that were identified by the inspector. So in terms of the principle of development, clearly members will be aware of existing and emerging policies within the draft local plan, and the application has been assessed on that basis. The various rooms and room sizes are set out with your agenda papers and are considered acceptable. In particular, I think it's worth highlighting the importance of policy H10, the draft policy within the local plan, which refers to the need to have regard to a number of factors. One of those in particular is whether or not properties are suitable in terms of size, design, layout for continued use as a family dwelling. And obviously that part of the policy, of the draft policy, is being used by your officers to push back on quite a number of HMOs in parts of the city, particularly around Picton and elsewhere, because your officers are of the view that many of those could continue to be used as a family dwelling. In this particular case, we've had regard to policy H10, but given the nature of the property above a shop and its previous use, we're satisfied that it could not be argued that it will continue to be used as a family dwelling, and therefore consider that the principle of development is acceptable. In terms of the amenity of the future occupiers, again, it's been assessed having regard to the various policies that operate. And because of the changes that have taken place between the previous application and this one, particularly in relation to windows, we're now satisfied that the amenity of future occupiers would be acceptable and would not be harmful. And then in terms of other matters, Chair, particularly around highways and so on, we set out the various matters to be considered in the agenda papers. Just finally, Chair, picking up on Councillor Shortall's comments about the dumping of rubbish and the concerns about waste. Absolutely recognise that issue, and you'll see from paragraph 3.9, Chair, that we discuss this. So all residents will be able to access the rear yard and the internal bike storage. The area is considered to be sufficient in size for the storage of bins in accordance with the City Council's recycling team's responses. And we are recommending conditions that require the use of the the bin should be stored within the rear yard and the designated bin storage area and only removed from the premises on the day that the bin collection would occur. And a further condition requiring the segregation of both residential and any commercial waste generated by the shop units on the ground floor. So we are alive to those concerns that have been raised by local ward councillors. Just in terms of a specific management plan for waste management, I don't think that's proportionate or appropriate, given that there is sufficient space within the property that allows for that bin storage to be controlled and subject to those additional conditions. So for all of those reasons, Chair, we're happy to recommend approval subject to the various conditions attached. Happy to answer any questions that you or members may have. Thank you.
No. Yes, come in. Was it Steve Radford who wants to ask the question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got some sympathy with what Councillor Shortall was articulating. The streets are very, very narrow and relatively short with no turnaround point. And I think we had one case, one of the two streets there was blocked by a van just parked sideways across the street recently. Are we really convinced that this is the only sort of development that can take place? I use the argument of opportunity costs. What else would happen if we didn't do this? It does seem a very intense use of a relatively small building on the front. Are the standards adequate, and do we have any space at all for parking at all? And I would have thought the answer is not at all. It would only need one person renting there to want a van, and there is just no car space on those side roads at all.
Hand over to you as case officer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think,
if you wouldn't mind summarising, please, John.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. So a couple of issues raised by Councillor Radford. I think the first was what other matters have been considered. Obviously, it's not for us or you as a planning committee to consider potential alternatives. It's for you as a planning committee to make a decision on the application that's currently before you, which is for an HMO. And I acknowledge Councillor Radford's comments that this is a particularly intensive HMO. In particular, there are a number of double rooms proposed. But nonetheless, all of those rooms comply with the HMO licensing standards, and the room sizes and so on are considered appropriate having regard to those standards, which is what your policy requires. I think it's also worth just having a quick look at the photograph, if we're able to get that on the screen. And just in terms of a potential fallback position, clearly this could be converted to a number of flats. So I think effectively you've got 3 individual shop units there. Permitted development rights that pertain to these types of properties allow the conversion of spaces above shops into 2 flats per property. So I would argue there you've got effectively 3 properties, albeit that there are now it's now 1 property in terms of bargaining world, but clearly there were 3 individual shop units there previously. I would say that those upper floors are therefore potentially able to accommodate 6 flats and therefore potentially 12 people. So it's not, in terms of the overall numbers, it's not dissimilar to what you could allow under permitted development rights. In terms of the impact on car parking, obviously that's acknowledged. Your officer's experience around HMOs is that there is a very low car ownership associated with them. And again, the issues around car parking are specified in your agenda papers. And we considered that given the relatively low car ownership rates with HMOs, this would not present a particular problem in terms of highway safety or manoeuvrability. Happy to answer any further questions, Chair.
We have a question now from Councillor Makinson.
Thank you, Chair. Just echoing what Councillor Radford said really about the parking issues. I know you said there's a low car ownership, but even with a lower car ownership than the standard, if there is 14 occupants, that is likely to result in some people owning cars and adding to congestion. It does seem like an overdevelopment of quite a small site. I know you said that the HMO licensing standard has been achieved for those rooms, but how does that work with sort of national described space standards on another development? You know, are they quite small in terms of the space given? Also, I note that in the new application, they are all en suite, but the kitchens are going to be communal kitchens. That kind of raises alarm bells for me in terms of making them pandemic proof, in terms of, you know, we know that the rates of COVID-19 have been higher in places where people are you know, more closely packed in together, sort of thing. So I think that this is really a you know, an overdevelopment of that site, and I do share the concerns of other councillors regarding the waste. Although I accept that there is bin storage, there does seem to be an issue with the access now for the shop getting the commercial bin storage. I wonder if you could clarify that for me as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If you're happy for me to respond to those points. In terms of the nationally described space standards, clearly this is a property that is to be used for multiple occupancy. So it's to be considered effectively as a single property. So the nationally described space standards aren't applicable in that sense. This is an HMO, and therefore it is subject to separate standards, particularly around individual room sizes. Those room sizes are specified again in the report, and as it's made clear in the report, those space standards comply with HMO licensing standards. Your planning policies, both in the UDP and in the draft local plan, refer back to those HMO standards in terms of the overall planning position. So in terms of your consideration from a planning perspective, you ought to have regard to those HMO licensing standards when you consider whether or not the proposal affords a satisfactory level of amenity for those future occupiers. So given that it complies with HMO licensing standards, I think it's implicit that it is acceptable in terms of future amenity. In terms of the communal kitchens, again, I acknowledge the point, but again, this is an HMO. Actually, the provision of kitchens that are throughout this HMO exceed what would normally be required. I think by a factor of 2. So, having regard to those HMO licensing standards. So again, I acknowledge the point, but clearly this is a scheme that is compliant with those wider licensing standards. And then in terms of the bin storage area, I'm not sure if we're able to get the plan back on screen, but you'll see that there is an area specifically shown within the ground floor part of the scheme, and essentially your officers are satisfied that there is suitable provision for both the commercial waste associated with the retail and for the for the flats. So I think you can see that on the screen, Chair, bottom left corner.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Happy to
And
answer.
it also indicates that in the notes, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
So I hope, yes, I hope that's been addressed, Councillor Makinson. And I can't see any other hands going up.
Chair, I'd like to move an opposition on this.
Steve Radford, if you'd like to come in.
Sorry, ma'am. Can I just say, I hear what the officers are saying, and I take that as good faith about minimum standards, but I think it ignores the unique congestion of the 2 small roads, and they are incredibly small roads, probably no more than 20, 24 type houses in a very narrow cul-de-sac. Any extra car there, just an extra car, would congest the whole street. So I'd like to move an amendment that it is an overdevelopment in that locality and in that and no car parking.
I need to move my amendment, my motion first. So I'd like to move the recommendation be approved as agreed.
Opposed.
For the benefits of, thank you, Chair. For the benefit of the public, what viewing proceedings and obviously for members participating today, just for clarity, we now have the Chair having moved the recommendation that the application be approved, and we have Councillor Radford seeking to move an amendment, the substance of which is that the application be refused on the basis that the proposed development would constitute an overdevelopment of the application site, and due to the absence of parking provision would have a substantial negative impact on highways and pedestrian safety in the area adjacent to the application site. In order for the amendment to be voted on, it was required to be seconded. Does any member wish to second that amendment? If so, please indicate clearly. Councillor Makinson, is that your seconding?
Yes.
Thank you. So for purposes of clarity, we'll vote firstly on Councillor Radford's amendment, the effect of which would be to request that the application be refused. And for purposes of clarity, where the amendment to be approved, a further report will be brought back to this committee, setting out and formalising potential reasons for refusal. So that'll be a second opportunity for the committee to confirm its reasons thereof. So therefore, all those members in favour of the refusal, I'll take you in sequence. So firstly, Councillor O'Brien, your vote, please.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Against, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat. Thank you. Councillor Makinson.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Radford.
For.
The effect of the vote is therefore that the amendment falls by a large majority, and Councillor Makinson and Councillor Radford, your Your endorsement of the amendment will be recorded accordingly. We now revert to the Chair's original motion, the effect of which would be to approve the application. For purposes of the record, are members happy to reverse their respective voting so that Councillors Radford and Makinson are recorded as against and the remaining members are recorded in favour? Just if you could indicate visually on screen for that purpose, that's excellent. Thank you. And that concludes the voting on this particular application, and the application is therefore carried by a large majority, Councillors Radford and Makinson dissenting. We will now move on to our next item of business on today's agenda, which is number 9 on the papers, and which relates to a site at Deysbrook Lane Southwest, Liverpool 12, which is located in Yew Tree Ward. For the benefit of the public and for members participating today, we have no speakers for this particular application, either for or against. However, in order to assist the committee in considering the application, a number of images of the site will be displayed on screen now. If you would briefly bear with
now exiting
your respective patients, and will then ask the case officer to introduce the application accordingly. Thank you.
So would the case officer like...
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if there was another slide that we can move on to. Sorry, Mike. And again, please. That's helpful. And there we are. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mike. So, Chair, obviously this is a type of application which you and members of the committee are already familiar. So it's an application for the erection of telecommunications equipment comprising a 20-metre mast with associated antenna and cabinets. Essentially, Chair, the issues that you as a planning committee are entitled to consider are the siting and the design of the equipment. So in this particular case, you'll see from the report that it is located close to the Tesco facility on Deysbrook Lane, and it's considered, given that sort of wider context, that this is an appropriate street structure within the surrounding street. You can see it obviously quite a substantial structure when compared against the street lighting columns, but it's also within a fairly large carriageway, and again is seen against that sort of wider backdrop of commercial properties. So for all of those reasons, Chair, your officers have concluded that in this particular case, the siting and the design of the telecommunications equipment is acceptable in this particular location and have therefore recommended approval accordingly. Clearly, these are matters of judgment, Chair. Happy to answer any questions that members may have.
I can't see anybody indicating, so I'm going to move that the recommendation be approved. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Moving straight to the vote. Your vote, please, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Makinson.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Radford.
He left the building.
Yeah, it does appear Councillor Radford's audio has ceased, therefore he won't have taken part. That concludes the voting on the application. Of those members present and eligible and able to vote, the application is approved by a large majority. We therefore move on immediately to item number 10 on today's agenda, which relates to a site at 64 Allerton Road and 42 Queensdale Road, Liverpool 18, which is located in Church Ward. As members will recollect, at the start of proceedings today, Councillor Makinson declared an interest on this particular application, and while she will not be voting, she will be speaking on the particular application in due course when invited by the Chair. So, Chair, if I can revert to you, please.
I'd like to invite Simon Wanderer to speak about this application. And I think, Simon, there will be some slides appearing on the screen shortly. If you'd like to come in. Yes, the slides are here now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Simon, so carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. I should note I can't see the slides, but I'll bring them up
Oh,
on
I
my own
see.
computer.
That's
so
a bit
that I can-
difficult for you. At the moment, we've just got a photograph of
Yes,
the
I've got the slideshow on my computer, so if I just sort of tell you when to advance, if you can make sure that I'm on the same page as you are, then that should be okay.
I hope that will work. Yes, Simon, carry on.
Firstly, thank you very much for permission to address the committee this morning. I hope I can be of some assistance. I should point out in advance that I'm not a planner. I represent the applicant. Our architect, who actually drafted the plans and application, was unavailable today at the notice provided. So we are keen to try and progress matters, which is why I'm attending, and I hope I can assist to the extent possible. But I make you aware of my position from the outset. Slide 1 shows a photograph of the front of the property, which is a shop on Allerton Road. The property was formerly occupied by Sayers the Bakers, who ceased occupation of the property in 2019 following a corporate restructuring of that company. I'll move on to the second slide, please, which shows the existing floor plans, which should already be within the application papers. As you can see, the property as it stands comprises a large shop on the ground floor, first floor office space, which was previously used also by Sayers the Bakers, and the second floor is a 2-bedroom flat. The access to the first and second floor is currently through a rear staircase access through the back alley off Queensdale Road, side street. If we move on to the third slide, that shows the side elevation of the property to Queensdale Road. There are 4 versions of that elevation. The purpose of this slide is to demonstrate the way in which the proposals have been amended over the past year or so in discussions with the council's planning department and in accordance with the planning officer's recommendations. So you will note the bottom left photograph image shows the proposal as it started, which included a full height extension to the rear to enlarge the second floor. That has been scaled back in 2 further revisions in discussions with planning in order to reduce in scale and also to redesign the roof in accordance with the planning officer's guidance. If we move on to the fourth slide, that shows the current proposal as amended, which provides for a retention of retail space towards the front of the ground floor. The rear of the ground floor will now form the bottom of a duplex residential unit. There is then a further flat to the front of the first floor and 2 flats in the second floor, so a total of 4 flats to be provided. Moving on to the final slide, we've included a couple of notes, some of which I think are important to note and put matters in context. I should note that the applicant is not in its nature a short-term opportunist developer business. They've owned the property since the 1980s and they're looking to deliver a development of quality here, not simply the cheapest conversion possible. If they were looking to achieve a cheap and quick financial exit, probably the best way to do that would be to convert the first floor under permitted development rights. And that would lead to, that would deliver probably a not dissimilar number of occupants, but in accommodation of far lower quality, which would still be accessed through the back alley. Instead, what is to be provided is to reinstate a previously in use entrance to Queensdale Road to provide better access for the development and deliver a higher standard of accommodation. The other point that I would note is that a number of objections in relation to parking have been made. I'm sure the planning officer can provide guidance on that and has done so within her report to you. I would note, though, that given the location and the nature of the development, the parking need is not anticipated to be great. And I would also ask you to put in context the fact that the alternative would be, as I've said, some sort of permitted development to the first floor and a retention of the second floor flat, which itself would generate a similar level of parking requirement, if any. And therefore, I don't believe the parking issue is particularly significant. The applicant has consciously retained and doesn't propose to build within the rear yard area precisely in order to accommodate waste provision for the flats and the shops. And the hope is that this will provide much needed accommodation within a residential area which is in demand, and also importantly increases the prospects of bringing the retail unit back into use, which has been vacant for now well over a year and is considered to be too large to easily let within the context of the demand in the market, and a smaller unit being more in tune with requirements of retailers. That ends what I have to say, but I'm happy to take any questions to the extent that I can help.
Thank you, Simon. Are there any questions? Simon, there don't seem to be any questions, so can I thank you for your presentation, which was very clear. And I would invite the case officer to comment on the presentation now and summarise the issues.
Chair, if I may, we do have Councillor Makinson who wishes to speak.
Sorry, I forgot. Sorry.
Chair, just before we bring in Councillor Makinson, can I ask members to please mute your respective microphones? We are getting some feedback at the moment, so if everyone can please mute your microphones at this stage, please, just to make the audio clear. Thank you, that's excellent. Over to you, Councillor Makinson, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to express my views on this. There is considerable parking issues on those streets, Kingsdale, Queensdale, and this can only exacerbate those issues. So we're going to have 4 flats with, potential for perhaps another 8 extra cars. There are serious issues on those streets, and I think it's just going to be an overdevelopment of quite a small site. Some of the issues of overlooking the adjacent properties have been addressed, but I think there are still issues with the waste issues, and there are also most definitely issues with parking, and that is a major problem on that site. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Makinson. Are there any questions? So can I hand over to the case officer now to summarise on the issues?
Thank you, Chair. As you've heard, this proposal is to erect extensions in connection with the conversion of the premises into 4 flats whilst retaining the ground floor retail use. As you saw from the presentation, the scheme has been significantly amended to change the design of the extension during the course of the application. It has resulted in the number of flats originally applied for being reduced from 5 to 4. You'll have seen from the plans that we had up before, the design was changed so it ensures that transition from a 3-storey development down to the lesser 2-storey terrace street, which is the current relationship, and we're happy that that's an appropriate design response to this part of the city. The site's located in a district centre where residential uses are considered to be acceptable, particularly above retail premises, and as such, the principle of residential use is considered to be acceptable, subject to other plan policies. As you heard from John Hayes on the previous item, under permitted development rights, the upper floors could be converted into 2 flats regardless. So technically, the overall impact or additional impact over and above permitted development rights that you're being asked to consider is for 2 additional units. So the internal arrangement of all the rooms is considered to be acceptable and in accordance with your policies and complies with the nationally described space standards. The scheme also incorporates sufficient off-street bin storage to accommodate 8 bins, of which 6 would be dedicated to the apartments and 2 for the retail use. Those 6 bins would be split into 3 recycling and 3 general waste, and this accords with the requirements of the recycling team. Many of the objections submitted have been related to highway concerns, and the application has been carefully considered by the Head of Highways and Transportation. He considers the site as in a highly accessible and sustainable location, being within a district centre with excellent links to goods, services and public transport. The absence of off-street parking is acknowledged, but he's satisfied that a development of this scale in its accessible location would not generate any significant need for off-street parking that would affect the local network. However, if there's specific questions about that, I'm sure my colleague Andy Dingwall could assist in that. So on the back of that, Chair, we're happy to recommend approval of the application, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Joe, would you like to come in? Councillor Hanson?
Sorry, Chair. You're breaking up very badly.
Would you put your question now, please, Joe?
Okay. And just in relation to the waste recycle, when I read the report, the report says from the waste recycling team saying that no plan has been made for separate storage and collection of recyclable waste. It's an area that already presents local waste management problems. This development could exaggerate the problems given by the lack of waste management strategy. And again, when the applicant made his presentation, he was talking about a quality development. And yeah, we've got a quality development with entrance from a back entry into a narrow yard that's full of bins that actually our waste recycling team don't find the plan acceptable. So I'm really struggling with the concept of a quality development and also the comments in the report by the waste recycling team. So Stuart, I'd like your comments on that. I don't particularly need a comment from Simon. You know, it's just a view that says my understanding of quality is certainly not the same level of quality that Simon understands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the comments from the recycling team, they acknowledge that they consider there's a problem in the wider area, not specifically from this premises, and they've asked in their response that they want 6 wheelie bins for the proposed flats, and that's what the applicant's provided. He's provided 6 wheelie bins off-site in a secure location. So they've complied with what the recycling team are asking for. And there's a condition that the bins shall only be placed outside on waste collection days. So we're happy that the applicant and the scheme is providing for the level of bin storage that the recycling team is asking for. I mean, originally it came in as 5 flats, it's now 4 flats. So those comments may well have been in connection with the original submission, which has been reduced. But regardless, the scheme is still providing the number of bins that the recycling team are asking for in a secure location off street. So we're happy that this scheme won't exacerbate any problems that may exist at the moment. Sorry, Chair, I can't hear.
I noted from my notes that there's now going to be 2 methods to access the flats. So would you add a comment on that? Would there be a new front access?
Mike, can you pop the plans up for me, please? My understanding is that there's new access going in from the side.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but there is an additional access.
Yeah. So if you look at the plan there, on the left elevation, on the ground floor plan, you'll see a new door.
I see. Yes.
Leads to a staircase. So that will be the entrance into the flats. and the bin store is on the south elevation, to the rear. So you go in through the yard to get the bins, which is quite normal.
I see. So it will be through. So I misunderstood. I knew there was a new access, and I thought it wouldn't have been modified for that.
Yeah, the bin store's still at the rear, as is the case with most properties, but the pedestrian access to the actual flats themselves is direct off street.
Okay. Simon Wanderer had his hand up, and if he's got any more to add, I would invite him to speak. But he's so I was giving the case officer to cover points.
Yes, I was simply going to answer that point on the access. It is going to be accessed through reinstating the front door on 42 Queensdale Road. So that was a lot of what I meant when I spoke about improving quality. So it will no longer be accessed through a rear alley. It will be accessed through a street front door, which I think is preferable.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Are there any other questions? So I'm going to move on to the vote then. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Any further comments from members? No. In which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle?
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy?
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this application, and the application is approved by those eligible and taking part in voting on this particular application item of business. We will therefore move on to our final item of business on today's agenda. That is number 11 on the papers, which relates to Moonwood at number 220A, Aigburth Road, Liverpool 17, and which is located in St Michael's Ward. Chair, if I can revert to you.
I'd like to invite Andrew Kelly to speak on this application, and slides should appear, Andrew. So if you'd like to come in now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
Good morning.
Right, okay. 2 years ago, planning consent was granted to construct 16 number 2-bedroom apartments on this site, as seen on the left of this slide. Construction work began in January 2020, but was paused due to the outbreak of COVID-19. This pandemic made the applicant review the development, deciding that residents should have better access to outdoor space and the ability to work from home in comfort. In response, we redesigned the top floor and replaced the flat roof with a pitched roof to accommodate a total of 20 flats instead of the original 16. Of those 20 flats, 2 would have private gardens, 6 private balconies, with a further 6 flats having Juliet balconies. The top floors would accommodate 8 duplex apartments with a smaller second bedroom or home workspace intended for single people or couples who wish to work from home. This in turn offers a wider variety of apartments and greater choice that responded to the lifestyle changes brought about by the pandemic. Our presentation today will focus on the differences between the approved scheme and the proposed development. This first slide shows the visual comparison between the two schemes when viewed from Aigburth Road. The proposed scheme on the right shows the addition of a traditional pitched roof and 6 balconies. The addition of the pitched roof would have a minimal visual impact on the street scene, whilst the balconies add further visual interest to the frontage. Other architectural features, such as horizontal banding and the use of warm red and brown brick colours, are retained from the original design and reflect the character of buildings in the area. Next slide, please. Our second slide shows the relative building heights of the approved and proposed developments, again when viewed from Aigburth Road. The proposed roof ridge would represent a gradual transition in height from the former community church building on the right up to the higher ridge of the adjacent church on the left. The proposed ridge height would also relate to the scale of the Victorian buildings located on the opposite side of Aigburth Road. Next slide, please. This slide shows the rear of the property when viewed from the car park. The proposed elevation shows the pitched roof together with solar panels to the rear only. These solar panels are discreetly located and not visible from the conservation area on the opposite side of Aigburth Road. The ground floor living rooms would have direct access to outdoor spaces with Juliet balconies added to the upper floors. Next slide, please. These approved and proposed site plans show the apartment building shaded in grey. The building footprint remains unchanged from the original, with the same separation distances to all boundaries and neighbouring properties. Vehicle access to and from the car park would remain as approved, together with the original landscape scheme. There are 20 car parking spaces proposed, providing 100% parking provision. This is to the satisfaction of Highways and Transportation. There are also 2 disabled parking spaces in proximity to the entrance. The blue shaded area shows a larger bicycle store for 20 bikes, whilst the red shaded area shows a larger refuse store. Next slide, please. In summary, the proposals consider the changing habits of a population and their needs as a direct consequence of the pandemic. The new development would offer a wider choice of high quality homes, responding to new demands for home working and access to outside spaces. The proximity of disabled parking spaces, graded entrances and modifications to internal layouts ensure the current proposals represent significant access improvements to the approved scheme. The scale, height and pitched roof design of the proposal is consistent with the majority of other buildings facing onto Aigburth Road. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions for Andrew? Councillor Makinson.
Yes, I'm very pleased to see that there is now provision for outdoor space in quite a number of those apartments. The question I've got is regarding something in the report about the partial destruction of a protected sandstone wall, and I'm just interested whether that has been repaired or what the plans are to put that back. Thank you.
Can you answer that, please, Andrew, if you're able?
Yes, sure. Well, currently, the construction work is on hold, instigated by the outbreak of COVID. So what you're witnessing at the moment is effectively a construction site. The proposals relate to some minor modifications to the stonework walls, and all that work will be made good in due course, obviously, as we move towards completion of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I think, you know, that the plans that showed, the TGIs showed the wall intact. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to hand over to our case officer to summarise the issues with regard to this application.
Thank you, Chair. You've had a very detailed presentation from the applicant, which I think has been really helpful in demonstrating what's been approved compared to what's being proposed now, so you can gauge what the differences are between the two schemes. As you've heard, the proposals to vary an existing approved scheme in 2019 for 16 flats by adding an additional 4 flats utilising a revised roof form. This previous scheme was previously accepted by the committee, and the site is an appropriate location for residential use within the district centre. The increase in the extra storey is considered to be acceptable in terms of visual impact on the street scene, as you saw from the street scene comparisons before, with the pitch roof space being utilised to accommodate the additional flats so as to minimise the building scale. The height and roof shape is now very similar to that nearby and is such that it's considered there would be no unacceptable impacts. The building siting is considered to be suitable and achieving appropriate interface distances as previously approved, so as not to result in any unacceptable levels of overlooking or overbearing nearby occupiers. The proposed design is in keeping with the locality, using a simple brick palette, and the use of balconies is not considered to be detrimental to the wider street scene, with such features being commonplace on apartment buildings across the city. A construction management plan is proposed to mitigate the impacts of construction disturbance, and there are appropriate levels of waste storage being provided. The scheme's been carefully considered by the Head of Highways and Transportation, who is happy that the proposal fully complies with off-street parking requirements, with 100% parking being provided, as well as being in a highly accessible district centre location, so as not to have any detrimental impact on the local highway network. The scheme is subject to Section 106 payments. However, given the proposal is a variation of a previous consent, some monies have already been paid in connection with that previous consent, and therefore this Section 106 just deals with the additional 4 units. Chair's note is attached, which clarifies the monitoring fee, which was also paid on the original consent, but at the time of writing of the report was not clear. So that's in your Chair's notes, Chair. On the back of that, Chair, we're happy that this is a positive scheme, and it's one we welcome, and we're happy to recommend approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Well, I do have one in connection with this, Stuart, and that is about the fact that we did have a lot of objections on the first round, and a lot of them did revolve around parking, as you've mentioned, but also about the nuisance from construction, because there is a little estate next door, which we consented. But will there be a construction management plan to try and address potential issues?
Yes, Chair, there will be. It's listed as an approved document. It was submitted with the application, and we're happy that it's an appropriate vehicle for mitigating. Clearly, you can never eradicate any noise and disturbance from a construction site, but we can mitigate it as best we can.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased to hear that, because I think the residents in Tramway Road have had for years kind of nothing going on that site, and I suppose it's been a bit of a shock to them. So I'm going to move that the recommendation as amended be approved. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. In the absence of any further comments from members, we'll move straight to the vote. So firstly, your vote, please, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson? Councillor Hanson, you're on mute. If you could just indicate your vote.
My apologies, Michael. Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Kennedy?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. And lastly, Councillor Makinson?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this application. The voting is unanimous of those members present and eligible to vote on this application, and it is therefore approved on that basis. That concludes our agenda items for today, and indeed that concludes our final scheduled meeting in this municipal year. Chair, if you'd like to make any appropriate closing comments as you see fit.
Thank you, Michael. My closing comments are to say, who has been on the planning committee in this municipal year, we've got through a great deal of work. We've had the challenges of the pandemic, and we've dealt with them, and I think we've become even more transparent and accountable than we were when we had to meet in the city council council chamber. But I do know that whatever happens next year, we're supposed to return to that model. But I just hope that now it has been opened up to a wider audience, that people will get more interested and still come along with their comments and proposals, which will continue to be very well debated. Thank you, everybody, for all you've done. And I look forward to seeing you next year, but there's a lot of doubt about that.
Thank you, Chair. And on behalf of the officer corps supporting you members of the committee as well, we'd just like to extend our thanks to the Chair, Deputy Chairs, members of the committee for your patience and support during the last 12 months. Obviously, as the Chair's alluded to, there have been some challenges, and we've embraced new technology very, very rapidly, which has had its moments of problems. That's certainly true, but it's also, as members would have seen, improved the numbers of members of the public viewing proceedings remotely. And obviously that's an option hopefully the government will explore in regulations over the coming months. But again, certainly on behalf of officers, certainly our thanks to everyone for your respective patience. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Chair, it's Sam Campbell. I just want to send my thanks as well from myself and from the team to yourself, the deputies and the members. It's been a pleasure serving the planning committee this year in such exceptional circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sam, and extend our thanks to all the members of your team. It's been a great joint effort.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Just to confirm that this will conclude today's proceedings, and I will shortly cease the live stream. So if any further comments from members, please make them now. Otherwise, I will end the live stream now. Thank you, everyone viewing today's proceedings.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Trish, for being the chair. I think you've been a great chair this year. It has been a challenging year, and I'd just like to pay my respects to you, to the officers, and to all of the members of the committee in what has been a really challenging year.
Thank you, Tony.